So this is just our general update and the ranking update. And for Chelsea and Ramon, this was our Google sheet that we went through. And I just put a screenshot in there so we have a reference for it. We have 17 that we decided on, the rankings and the justifications, and they can be adjusted a little bit. After some more discussion, though, we think we might bump triangular facets up to a ranking of 4. And then the ones that we've highlighted in yellow are ones that we wanted to get your input on so we can talk about that the next time we meet. And then the ones at the bottom are ones that we've added after the fact and ones that we just probably need a little bit more clarification on to try to fit them into the table. And so from that, I just took this table with the same justifications of the features that I used for my mapping area. And so I did another thing with like primary, secondary, and we discussed last week that we weren't really going to try to tie the difference between them into the rankings. We were just going to try to use kind of general intuition and analysis based off of some of these points to try to distinguish between them. And so what we ended up deciding to do would be to break the trace into 1 kilometer sections, and then we would count each of the geomorphic features individually, and then I would consolidate them into a table. I would add all of them with their respective rankings to get like a total number for that segment. And then I normalized all of the section rankings. So I did it on a scale of 1 to 4, because that's what we had previously for the fault confidence. And then I would just assign them accordingly. So I took out all of my geomorphic mapping just to make it a bit simpler to see. And so these are my little sectioned out things. I did one primary fault, a secondary primary fault that had a shorter trace, and then a secondary fault in the northwest corner from last week. And so I made a table and I just kind of started going each section by section and then kind of tallying off every geomorphic feature that I would see and then total it up at the bottom. And so I had a pretty big range, like from 0 to almost 20. And I did the same thing for the shorter primary fault. It had about like half the segments. And then what we were talking about, Joe and Jack, was the proximal river along the entire trace. And since I wasn't super confident about my understanding of that, I didn't put it as a geomorphic feature yet, but I'm sure if I did, it would probably have a higher number. And then I did that for the smaller secondary fault, which only had 6 segments in the northwest, northeast. And so I consolidated all of my rankings. These are just the total numbers for each segment. And then I used this equation to normalize them in a range from 1 to 4. And so not many of them had exactly like 1, 2, 3, or 4. The secondary fault was a little bit better. Oh wait, no, that was the primary fault. This is a secondary fault, but
For your
like,
equation, what did you use to get that?
I looked up online how to normalize a range of data values in Excel, and
Oh,
so
nice.
there I can put it in the Google Drive too because it was really helpful. But it's pretty much taking this is like the range that you choose 4 to 1, and then you take like the minimum, the maximum, and it explains it more in depth on the website. It just gives you a normalization between whatever range you decide, and I chose 1 to 4. And since a lot of them weren't exactly on the nose, I decided to use like my best judgment, because if something was like really close to 2, I was like, it's probably a 2. If something was like somewhere in the middle, I tried to make a certain cutoff. Or if you would like reference back to the segment, you could kind of look at either side of that segment and be like, are those 2 stronger ones and I just have a weaker one, and how should I connect them? So I used the table from last week and then kind of adjusted it based off of like a basic range. I kind of just threw the numbers down there and it seems to be all right. And then because there wasn't many, like the 3 and the 4 range, I'll probably have to adjust a little bit. That's pretty much just like the general idea of what I have so far. And I threw this back up there for like later discussion and go back to it to see if we could get any questions answered. And then I had some more questions, which I guess I could just post to the group. I was thinking um, in my large primary plane, when there's like the alluvial plain where there's active drainages and there's just like no features, but on either side there's strong indication, should we take into account that there's an alluvial plain and not put it as low as it would be if there was no geomorphic features? Or should we just like stick to what we've set out to do? And then I was
So you're saying
thinking,
like if there's a higher confidence on one side or the other of your current section, if that should influence the section that you're working on.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, because I probably didn't map as much as the geomorphology as I should, I think in order for this to work, you have to really, really map every single piece of the geomorphology in order to get a better sense of what's going on and a bit more accurate of a rating. And then in order to do that, I think it might help, especially for you, Jack, because your area is so huge, to maybe increase the segment line distances from 1 kilometer, depending on how large the area is.
Mm. So I don't
Um,
know. I like that because I was thinking about the same thing. Like if I have a heavy confidence level and then like a one, and then I go down to a three and then back to a one because of those numbers. I would think that like just logically, like if I'm doing the mapping without trying to follow like strict numeric guidelines, that I would bump that three at least up to a two, for like
mhm.
my personal mapping. Like I'd be like, okay, if there's a heavy confidence on the left, heavy confidence on the right, then in the middle, it's probably branching. I can't really see much evidence, but I'd probably, I mean, I think that we probably should take that into account.
Right. Yeah. Because I was saying there has to be some kind of level of judgment, because real life is always going to change what an equation will give you. So,
Yeah.
and then these were just
I,
like our questions that we were going to expand on a little bit that we were talking about before, but we can put a pin in those for next week.
Mm-hmm.
I really like your presentation. That's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to keep mine short, and I like going last, is because I knew you were going to cover a majority of what we had done. I hope Joe has done the same, but uh, I think that the direction that we're heading, and specifically, is that one of the, what do you have, 3 or 4 maps that you're working on? Oops.
Yeah, I have 3. So I have Parkfield and my Napa, and then the one that Joe is working on towards the end.
Yeah. New Zealand.
And are they in you? How many different types of faults are you going to be working on?
The first 2 are strike slip because they're along or near the San Andreas, and then the one in New Zealand, is that a reverse, Joe?
Uh, oh, in New Zealand. Yeah, I think that was had components of strike slip and reverse. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So
So
then we'll probably have to expand a little bit on the indicators to include more, but since mine was like strike slip, I kind of kept it a little more narrow.
yeah.
No,
So,
absolutely. Because I really like that you had that Google sheet with the equation, but I was wondering how much variation that would be in different tectonic settings, you know. But that's
Hmm.
just, I thought, really well done though.
so the way I'm thinking about the question that you posed at the end is that like at some point when you're mapping, you have to take into account that it's also your like perception of what's happening, right? Like there is some like mapping influence that as like geologists will be doing. And like I don't think that our goal here is to make like a complete numeric method, but maybe like also have some pseudo guidelines, like here's the numerics, of like, okay, if you're unsure of the confidence levels, then here's some numerics that you can use to kind of figure out the confidence levels, but also take into account that if you look at 1 kilometer sections, to go back and then look at it at 3 kilometer sections, and then maybe make some variations to your line work,
Hmm.
you know, because there's got to be like a level of interpretation as well. So I think that along with our scale, that we would also do something that has to do with like our interpretation, like add like maybe a small section of interpretive steps to take post scale. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, every time you do something that's like a little bit, you as a geologist should be taking notes and
Mhm.
trying to rationalize why you did what you did. So that could be another part of it, not just being like, shouldn't be like a 0 and 1 type of thing. It would
That's
always
kind
have
of
some kind of interpretation or analysis attached to it.
that.
Let me throw up my screen. So I'm just gonna share my rough PowerPoint. I'm gonna just do this. I'm just not gonna do presenter mode. So Idaho, Pal Joseph, that's my name. ASU 2021. I was going to go into our naming scheme, but this was covered by Rachel, so I just took out those slides. We did a really good job. Kind of how Rachel was talking about doing a normalizing of the faults along a line. I was kind of trying to do that with mine, but I'm working with a new area, so I have to map along with doing my normalizing. So I think what I might do moving forward is probably go back to a previous map that I've done and try to do it off of that. Like do something off of maybe when actually it might be nice to do it from New Zealand. I was gonna ask them if I could use this. It's a hill shade layer that Chelsea sent me to be able to figure out, like to normalize like my hill shades, but I'm not sure what date this is. If this is like usable for the date of my eruptions, and I wanted to ask her about that, but I won't be able to today. Um, just some general progress I've made on the map. Just doing alluvial fans, triangular facets, putting points and things like that, and lineations. So yeah, I found some lineations up here, put some uh, different alluvial fans, triangle facets around there. Go ahead and just kind of get through this. How I'm doing the alluvial fan complexes, I'm just doing the alluvial fans, using the profile tool and things like that to figure out, like what age group the alluvial fans are, where I'm dating them, and then dragging this more like quaternary, like surface cover layer up as I go along. You can see it's kind of like inching up through here, and I'll probably spread it out up through here and there as well. And I wanted to see, I know I'm working on a normal fault system, but I wanted to ask her if this would be a good example of maybe like a pressure ridge, because you can see in this map here best, like the fault where I'm thinking runs along like kind of like this, V's into itself, curves up, and then kind of splays out a little bit like this. And I'm wondering if this is a fault trace that goes out, to the northeast or to the northwest. That if this might be a good example of a pressure ridge to put into our into our dock, but I'm not sure, so I need to see.
And then
And
just for them watching, we discussed we wanted to get Chelsea and Ramon's input about the difference between a shutter ridge and a pressure ridge, because we were looking through
right.
the structural geology textbook, the paleoseismology textbook, and we're trying to
Hmm.
find a couple of distinct differences between the two that we can find in our area to try to distinguish them.
Yeah, it's become kind of a problem cognitively to like differentiate and try to get a good grasp of how to identify them. And then down here, I just did a little bit of mapping with these. I wanted to ask about these smaller formations and if I should put them as triangular facets or just kind of leave them as is. So a lot of my presentation today is more questions about like mapping procedure, data
Were you able
usage,
to?
things like that.
Sorry, Joe. Were you able to figure out how to fix your Hillshade image, because it still kind of looks really distorted? Did you
So that
address that
that
yet?
was this that she sent me. That was this like it's like a world hillshade layer, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be allowed to use this or not. Chelsea sent me this as a link, but I wanted to just double check to make sure because my hillshades are from like the 60s. Like my data is from like way back, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be allowed to use this very well. So I've mostly just used it at like a larger scale, trying to like not get too deep in. I've been trying to not use it when I'm going zooming into areas. That way I'm not, getting different information. And that's why
I'd
like
say
this
what
one's.
the link, does it say what year the data was collected?
Let me double check. I think it's just on, you connect it through QGIS, but I'm sure that if I looked into it, I might be able to find that. Am I green?
Yeah.
Yeah, my does it all the time. I see it like on it. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna turn myself off because I
Okay.
don't know why mine does that, but yeah, no, I couldn't find that. I was looking for it, to see what year it was.
Are you
And I
also with
think,
the existing hillshade that you have?
right.
Change the lighting perhaps so the darker isn't as
Oh,
dark.
Okay, so I'm doing EMC week 2. My current focus was through the mountainous this weekend, was through this last week, was to mainly connect my drainage mapping from my northern section to my southern section. Our focus this week, we talked a lot, which was already previously covered by the 2 presenters before me, was already about the GIR, or the geomorphic indicator ranking, and on comments, and I'll make on points on notes, but we are still currently in the process of um, clarifying a lot of these details, and specifically for EMC in the areas that I'm working on, and such as in this example, I have, in portions that are in long sections, I have very few variety of geomorphic features, but I have a strong set of indicators single sets of indicators that provide details for faulting, such as this location right here, indicated in the green section on my previous map. That it shows a distinction of bedrock that exposed, a set of fault scarping, but mainly triangular facets. And I believe today the focus was to clarify a lot more on how we would approach, because for my scale, we had already addressed that we'd work at a 500 meter to 1,000 kilometer or 1,000 meter scale, but I'm not sure in my area how much detail that I would get out of just that small section, but that was already previously talked about. Some notes from our meeting on Monday. For me personally, how to address an alluvial fan complex with offset layering. How to address the bedrock layering within sections of those alluvial fan complexes. Something I wanted to address today was terminology on our geomorphic indicator ranking, because we have different terms, and which ones should we be using correctly. Discussing the impact of tonal contrast was something that I wanted to discuss today. What ranking would we give just observing tonal contrast in terms of geomorphic change? And that's it today.
Cool. So should we kind of just give some final points about what we're going to plan on doing next week for them, and then any remaining questions for things we'd like to address at the next meeting?
There is one point I forgot to mention on myself was we discussed it last time on our last meeting, but I need to really focus on georeferencing being really accurate, because on my mapping on certain sections, at least from the georeference maps that I got back from when we did it over last semester, there are sections on these that are completely distorted that almost invalidate like the georeferencing. It makes it to where like I don't want to use it, but then unfortunately for the large part of my map, and I can share it too, there is no DEM out there, at least that I know I'm available. So a lot of it's going to have to be based on tonal contrast, And so that's something that I want to be addressed moving forward. And also, just for our GIR, just getting that, I want to get our GIR down at least within the next week or so, so I could really focus on mapping a large portion of my geomorphology in sections that are very large and easy to map out.
I think
Right.
what I've been doing is just like I mean, like, just kind of full disclosures. I've been ignoring this ranking system, that GIR, and just kind of mapping along what I can map without really putting too many faults down, to where I can see kind of like how you were doing, Rachel, because you had yours, that your map that you had already, completed, and I'm trying to see, kind of get to the step that you just did. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, because you're in a new area.
Yeah, I'm not trying to focus too much on like, okay, what indicators do I have? I'm just trying to do it as though I'm still mapping naturally.
Right.
Because that's kind of like where I'm at also in my section, and I don't want to, especially when it comes to the comments that are needed on our faults. If I have sections where I can clearly mark out faults that I'm comfortable and I know where they are, I just don't know how much of our geomorphic features that we need to mention into our notes on our faulting, what they
I think
require.
I think honestly, if it's there and it's like, yeah, this is the thing that I can see that's telling me there's a fault here. Like for instance, like Wineglass Canyons that we haven't put down yet. Like if I have triangular facets and I have Wineglass Canyons, then I can say, oh, well, the Wineglass Canyons, also contribute to my alluvial fan system, which altogether brings me to say like the fault's probably right here. Like
And that's
these,
exactly what I was thinking
yeah,
too.
like these features have triangulated the area of where this fault is. I
I'm
think
not sure
that's,
if you were here earlier, Joe, when we switched over, but I mentioned that at least for normal faults, that's I wanted to add Wineglass Canyons as an important feature,
yeah,
because between triangular facets and Wineglass Canyons, that's almost like a third of my map mapped out
yeah,
completely.
yeah.
And so that would take out a big portion. So
So
if we could clear that up and move and get that taken care of, and then
I think,
if and that's just addressing normal faults, but if we have similar things that are just golden markers like that for strike slip, I really think that'll help out like the rest of your guys' stuff too.
I think honestly, if we can come up with a few more landforms, that we can find from someplace, and that we can kind of put a justification and maybe a tentative ranking too, down there at the bottom before we add it to the top. I think maybe that would maybe help us out a little bit. And then whenever we do get a hold of Ramon, because Chelsea is going to be gone for the next couple of weeks, whenever we do get a hold of Ramon, we can be like, okay, well, this is what we're thinking, this is where we're going. Because I think right now the more material that we can gather and more like stuff that we can get to work with, the better we'll be able to like move forward when we get some solidified guidance.
I like your
Mhm.
idea though, Joe, on just mapping out what we for sure know. Like for me personally this
Mhm.
week, I'll be mapping out all my triangular facets and all my Wineglass Canyons in this large map that I'm working on, which is LOD. But that's what I'll be focusing on. And those are two things that are really, really easy
Yep,
to
just
uh,
go for it.
to identify. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna mark notes on that. How
So
about you
Rachel, what
guys?
what do you think that would be a good thing to just kind of give them from our meeting today? I mean, other than just like the recording.
Right. I will probably, we can draft an email. I think we
Hmm.
should maybe make some more progress with the ranking because that's what they were a bit more concerned about per his email. So my general thing that I did, the normalization and then counting each individual feature along the segment and doing it that way, is that something that you guys agree with? Or did you have
Yeah,
something else in mind?
I think I totally agree with that. That's a great way to at least move forward, even if it's not the process we end with. You know what I mean?
For
Okay.
me, it depends because I have such like, especially if I'm in that large mountainous area, all I have are
Scale.
triangular facets and Wineglass Canyons for like large sections. And so I think I might have of course I'll be using the ranking system, but I think that we'll have to focus around like ranking certain.
What about ratios instead of kilometers? Like, we're doing 1 kilometer.
Yeah.
Maybe like if our area is 20 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers tall, then we can do by kilometer. But if it's like, 200 kilometers wide by 200 kilometers tall, maybe we do it by every 20 kilometers. So maybe we do instead like 1/10 of the mapping, width or height, something like that, because something more something more malleable to like scale, because I
Well,
think
for me
that's the
at
biggest
least,
issue with
moving
with
forward, I
drones.
will keep it at the individual. I'll count individually, and then I'll keep it at